Look, I think the previous speaker already has covered the gamut of the ASEAN cooperative endeavors, vehicles. I thought I could complement and contribute in this way by pointing to the larger themes, I think, of the ASEAN dilemmas and challenges during COVID-19. First, this is about now 6 months of COVID-19, roughly. And the COVID-19 has been devastating. And I think the most worrying trend is that it's not over anytime soon. We're looking at the unpredictability, the potency of the virus, coronavirus, longer term. And we're looking into third quarter now, second half of the year. I don't know when the travel restrictions can be lifted. Supply chains disruption has already been mentioned. I mean, the disruptions and the damages to the world economy overall, and not to mention, of course, in Southeast Asia, will be far-reaching, and we haven't seen the bottom yet. I think Dr. Johan and my fellow speakers on the panel, you can see that we will see third quarter, fourth quarter, the real bad news will start to roll in on economic impacts. Now, for ASEAN, we've just had the summit, virtual arrangement, and I also think the COVID-19 undermines the way that ASEAN works. Dr. Johan, can you imagine that ASEAN been around for almost 53 years? 53 years, it has worked. 53 years of those years, of those decades, only since 1999 it's been ASEAN 10. But the way that ASEAN really works is through personal, private diplomacy. It's not through these virtual meetings and this kind of online. The secret to the ASEAN success is really hammered out in the karaoke salons and the golf courses and so on. This is how ASEAN worked. So I noticed that the bureaucrats, the ASEAN bureaucrats, are adjusting very well to the challenge of COVID-19. We have just heard and saw a very almost fairly comprehensive presentation by my fellow panelists outlining all these various acronyms and so on, the COVID fund, the pandemic fund, and so on. These are important. These are, this is what ASEAN does. This is what ASEAN does, is to come up with these various endeavors to promote cooperation, regional cooperation, under facing different challenges. But we will see in real terms how far these funds, these cooperative endeavors go, because I think the challenges are pretty daunting. So for example, I mean, one big challenge to come out of this would be the economic challenge, and that has been handled by setting up a fund and more collaboration. But ASEAN is going to be challenged, Dr. Johan, because we're looking around the region, the world too, of course, but our region is what we're talking about. For Thailand, we're looking at an economic contraction, slowdown in Vietnam, Indonesia. All all economies will face some kind of either slowdown or outright recession, if not a deeper contraction. For Thailand, it's going to be -5 to -10. 2022 back to 2019 level, we might not see growth of GDP levels until when you come down to the individual economies, I think the COVID-19 has further exacerbated the trends that we already have seen. So, COVID-19 is nothing, it's an external shock. It hits everyone, but it's not something that we haven't seen in terms of the damages, the trends that we saw, how economies were challenged, how US and China rivalry and competition were dividing up ASEAN. This is now exacerbated and accentuated. So I'm thinking that ASEAN has to kind of think out of the box a little bit, apart from all the various vehicles, the various acronyms and so on. The leadership I don't know when they can see each other in person, and if they don't see each other in person, the bureaucrats can come up with more acronyms and alphabet soup and more endeavors and so on. But this is a time that the political will can be cultivated during these times of challenge. It seems a little bit paradoxical, but ASEAN leaders and societies should be heartened and encouraged, and aware of how fortunate they are to have this region, because what we will see and what we're seeing is a kind of a breakdown now of multilateralism. Multilateralism, you look at the WHO, you look at the UN system, look at how the US under President Trump has withdrawn and retreated. And this is a trend that has been worsening even before COVID. Now with COVID, we're just seeing more of it. So that's one trend. And then with the multilateralism breakdown, we're seeing more nationalism. We're seeing countries going on its own, such as the United States. We're also seeing more regionalization as a way of coping with the breakdown of multilateralism. Now, multilateralism, the breakdown, we don't want to see that. We all have a stake in a multilateral, liberal, rules-based international order that we've known for so long. But I think that's those days are numbered, if not past already. And what we have to look at is how to fend for ourselves individually as different economies, but also for regional support. And here, ASEAN has that regional support. The ASEAN community with the 3 pillars and all the various endeavors that we've heard earlier this afternoon. But beyond that, I think the leadership can take this as a time to come to terms and come to recognition that if they don't make ASEAN work and allow ASEAN to be divided as it has been, then there's nothing for them to look at outside ASEAN, because then you're looking at individual economies. This COVID-19 also, you can see, smaller economies are more challenged. So with the restrictions on air travel, kind of disruptions to supply chain and so on, we all have to become more domestically sufficient. Dr. Johan, if you know what I'm talking about, it's really just eerie and extraordinary that we've become a little bit more autarkic, relying on the domestic market, because the international markets are unreliable and international markets are in trouble. So, Indonesia has a big market, but you also need income. You also have to have buying power. And Thailand has a critical mass of market. And I think, I've been seeing over the last month, a lot of domestic demand has picked up with the reopening. So you can see that within countries, if you're smaller, like Laos, Cambodia, or even beyond outside ASEAN, smaller economies will not have the big internal market. So they'll have to rely on outside. For ASEAN, the outside international market, not to be, you can depend on that. But the region, the ASEAN region, with this, 655 million, almost $3 trillion GDP. So this is an impetus for the ASEAN leaders, if they can recognize it, to come to terms and recognize that we're very lucky to have this region, the ASEAN community, the ASEAN economic community, APSC, ASCC, all the things that we've talked about ASEAN, has been given I think a big boost because of the COVID-19, because of the breakdown in multilateralism. So that's one main theme, I think, that I would like to add, if I may. And then the other is related, which is the US-China rivalry and competition. And it's become a non-military war outside the battlefield, which means that the battlefields are not military, but this is becoming an all-around conflict, not just the trade and technology, but also the culture, the immigration, and we're seeing more and more of it in the U.S. Election year. I think President Trump will be very anti-China, very critical of China, right down to the wire, right down to the election date, because that's how he has to show up his base, by blaming outsiders, by blaming others. And China is the number one culprit in the eyes of the U.S. administration. But China also is beyond just the Trump administration. There's a bipartisan consensus in the U.S. that China is not to be trusted, that China has to be somehow taken to task. And this is a trend that we're seeing. We're likely to see more of that. Now, in terms of ASEAN, what we have to do is see how we go with it, which means if the U.S. and China, they have more conflict, and we're going to see more, I think, challenges between the two. This could break out into not just a non-military war, but it could actually lead to some kind of skirmish, big or small, and it's something we have to be very mindful of. China has divided ASEAN in the recent past with the South China Sea, the Code of Conduct. I think that's still front and center in whatever ASEAN member states do. And with the Vietnam Chairmanship of ASEAN, this is going to be prioritized, and Vietnam, I'm not sure if they, other panelists may have clearer ideas and clearer news feed, but it is possible that Vietnam could take China to court, much like the Philippines did in the recent past. So the U.S.-China dynamic, the pressure to choose between U.S. and China will build for ASEAN. And another reason then for ASEAN to kind of close ranks beyond the divisions we've seen in recent years is exactly this: is that not to be divided by either side. So that's the second kind of point I want to contribute. I'll leave behind that it's a time where the U.S.-China rivalry will get worse, and it will be even potentially verging on armed conflict is less implausible, which means that it's not a likelihood that will happen, but in the past it just seems unimaginable. But today it just seems less unimaginable with all the rhetoric, with the different moves, the U.S. carrier groups in the region, the FONOPs, and China's rebuttals and counter moves. So we have to bear that in mind, that it's a time not just have ASEAN for ASEAN, but it's also to have a time of ASEAN not being divided and co-opted by either side, and not having to choose from either side. So that's something I think we should consider. Third, Going forward, this will be a very different world. I mean, it's surreal that the way that the world economy is going to work, we may not be the same as before COVID. The jury is still out. How much will change? The longer this goes on, the more permanent features we will see. And I'm looking at Thailand's immediate neighborhood with Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and the mainland ASEAN states. And you can see in the mainland ASEAN states, the migration will be different. We have had migrant workers from Myanmar, almost 4 million of them. Some will be coming back, some will not be. And from Laos as well, from Cambodia as well. And the people's movement, the migration, including in Myanmar of the Rohingya along the border with Bangladesh, and people flows between Malaysia, Indonesia, and also between the Rohingyas down to the Malaysia as well. This is something that we have to keep an eye on, because it could lead to social impact, social devastation. If these people don't have jobs, and if there'll be more joblessness, more unemployment, they can't come and get to work and find jobs in Thailand, for example, like from Myanmar. What this will mean for families, for the knock-on effects. So I think the mitigation, the management of this kind of impact from COVID, especially in mainland Southeast Asia, I think will be key. And then, beyond that, moving forward, there'll be more ASEAN meetings, and of course the ASEAN summit later in the year, and the bigger summits related to the ASEAN summit, the East Asia summit in particular. I'm paying attention to these middle powers, Dr. Johan. The China, of course, is a big superpower in the acrimony with the US, another superpower. But Japan, South Korea, maybe even Australia to an extent, maybe India. This is where ASEAN should be paying more attention, putting more resources to build relationships with these bigger middle powers outside the US-China confrontation. And in Thailand, for example, there's a proposal to join the CPTPP, Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then we have the RCEP. The RCEP, I think there is a consensus on signing on ratifying or signing the RCEP, even without India. But interestingly, the RCEP is not facing domestic opposition in Thailand, but the CPTPP is. But CPTPP, in fact, comprises the major, the middle powers without the US and China. And I think that moving forward, the role of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, very, very sensitive, of course, but these countries have done very well handling COVID-19. The COVID-19 has become kind of the global test on nations' public health security systems. Those that have done well, handling, mitigating, managing, moving forward, reopening, those economies and states will have an advantage. And it so happens that East Asia generally, including the ASEAN region, has been seen to have done fairly well handling COVID compared to the US, United States, and Europe, for example. So as a last point, I think we should be thinking more outside the US-China confrontation and paying more attention to build relationships with Japan, South Korea, up to a degree Australia, and certainly India, even though RCEP will not include India. This is a way for ASEAN to increase its autonomy and its space, because the space has been limited, the space has been squeezed by the US-China confrontation and rivalry. But ASEAN has a good moment now, Dr. Johan. In a way, we have a tendency to make excuses for ASEAN and also to be cheerleaders of ASEAN. But I do think, as a kind of a ASEAN critic from time to time, that in fact COVID-19 is presenting an opportunity for the ASEAN states and leaders and societies to realize that outside this region things will be very troublesome, very worrying. The global economy will slow down and will go into recession. And it might not return to pre-COVID in the foreseeable 2-3 years at minimum. This is why this region has itself to work on, to rely on. And this is why this region, ASEAN, has to stay away from the US and China confrontation and rivalry and not choose one side or the other. And then that's why this region should be paying more attention to the middle powers and apart from itself. Dr. Johan.
Had a lot of very interesting insights on you. I think one of the takeaways for me is that you are seeing this very grave situation in ASEAN, not just as a challenge, but as an opportunity. I mean, you have pointed out to us that the multilateralism that works in the region is based on face-to-face relationships and so on. The ASEAN model, as we all know, has been that kind of model. It hasn't been really very rules-based, but it has been a lot of that. The informality has been as a major sort of factor behind ASEAN success. You also pointed out to us that this in this era where you have, well, it may or may not be connected to COVID, but it brings to the fore the rivalry between China and the US. And ASEAN has to remain fairly clear about its objectives vis-a-vis these two major superpowers, as it were, and not be dragged into a conflict with them or in conflicts that can side one side or the other, and perhaps pay more attention to the middle powers, as you mentioned, the East Asian powers of Korea, maybe Australia, and so on. So those are very, very interesting insights. I think we will have time later on for further explications. Maybe some of our participants may want to chip in with some further questions, but I think you have given us some very, very important sort of insights as to the kind of situation we are up against, in this current pandemic, in terms of not just the economic challenges, but also the larger kind of challenges that ASEAN faces and the individual countries within ASEAN.